So good afternoon everyone. We are here to continue with the chapter, that is chapter number 4, which is business services. Right. So yesterday when we were talking about business services, certainly, we talked about various other things which we continued, wherein we started with banking, right? And then with banking, we got to know what exactly banking is. Then we went on to the types of banks, wherein we studied there are basically four main types of banks, which is commercial banks, cooperative banks, specialized banks, and central banks. So yesterday we completed the commercial banks. Then we came on to two different categories of commercial banks, that is public sector banks and private sector banks. And then we discussed some of the examples along with the number of banks in our country. Then we went on to cooperative banks, right? Now we're going to start on today with specialized banks. So when we talk about specialized banks, what do you understand by them? They are basically organized to render. Now, render is basically to provide, right? You can say to render services, that means to provide services. Okay, so specialized banks are basically the ones which are organized to render or to provide specific services to the public. That means specific services. That means each and every bank is being given a certain service. ये जो bank है, it will be given this particular service to the people. This particular bank will be giving this particular service to the people. Now let's talk about foreign exchange banks. When we talk about example, it is foreign exchange banks. Now let's take an example. Suppose I as a person, I think of going on to another country, going on to visit some another country, right? So if I think of going to Australia maybe, right? So I'll be needing dollars, right? Because therein the dollars are working. So I'll be needing the currency there, right? So how will I get that particular money? I can go to any of the brokers also and get the currency. But what is the finest way to get the currency? It is foreign exchange banks, because they are the ones which are having a particular service to be provided. A foreign exchange banks kya hote hain? They are the ones which provide you the different type of currencies, right? Currencies of different countries. So now you can say the motive could be very different, that I want to go and visit that particular place, or I am going to study to that particular place, or maybe I'm planning to settle there. Anything could be there, right? So why we are talking about foreign exchanges? Basically, they are the banks which are which are there basically to provide a certain service. That means a certain service, as in when we talk about foreign exchange, they are the ones that are providing certain foreign currency to you, right? They are the banks which are providing you certain money for the same. Okay, so specialized banks they are basically the banks which are providing you a specialized service. That means when we talk about public sector banks, private sector banks, they are the banks which are providing you certain services that all the other banks are also providing. When we talked about check facility, we were talking about investment facility, we were talking about deposit facility, bank account facility. These are the normal banks. Like we talked about commercial banks, which are involved in private sector and public sector. But when we talk about specialized banks वो होते हैं जो कि आपको provide करते हैं कोई specific service. जैसे कि we were talking about foreign exchange banks. So foreign exchange banks will be the one which will be giving you the foreign exchange. That means the currency of any other country which I'll be needing, right? We talked about various examples that certainly if I wish of visiting any other country, so I'll be needing money, right? So I'll be needing dollars. So I gave the example of going on to Australia, right? So if I want to go into any other country, I'll be needing the currency for the same. So how will I get the currency for the same? I will be getting it from the foreign exchange banks, right? So जो ऐसे banks होते हैं which provide you a specialized service, which are meant to provide you that particular service, they are referred to as basically specialized banks, right? अब ये तो होगी foreign exchange banks की बात. When we talk about industrial banks, you can see in the examples, foreign exchange banks, industrial banks, import-export banks, that is Exim banks इसको बोलते हैं, EXIM, Exim banks. So import and export banks कौन से होते हैं? Like in the earlier second chapter we were talking about import and export, right? So import is basically the one which we are purchasing for our country, right? Export is basically which we are selling to the other country, right? It is very, very difficult. We already talked about there is a certain procedure, right? There's a certain procedure कि कैसे goods sell करे जाएंगे किसी और country को, या कैसे आप goods acquire कर सकते हो किसी और country के, right? So that is having a definite procedure. It is a lengthy procedure and it has a lot of rules and regulations required, right? So what do these banks do? They are the ones who are in charge of making the invoice of the same and the transfer of funds. Okay, so all the big multinational companies, we talked about MNCs, right, which are multinational companies. The companies which have the headquarters and which have their offices in more than one country, more than the home country, right? So all these MNCs which are there, even the normal companies also, जिनको भी import or export करना होता है, they are the ones which are the ones who take initiative and they put their money and they put their accounts into import and export banks. Okay, so again, why it is a specialized bank? It is a specialized bank because it is giving us a specific service. In banks को बनाया जाता है to provide a special and a specific service. It is different from the other banks which we studied about, right? It is different from the public sector banks, it is different from the private sector banks, it is different from commercial banks or the cooperative banks which we talked about. वो सारे banks different हुए, and these are a different category of banks which when we talk about specialized banks. Okay, so the if we talk about the hints or the example which we need to learn about them, the main could be foreign exchange banks and import and export banks, right? Let's proceed on. The next type of banks we talk about is central banks. So till now we have done three types of main type of banks. One was the commercial banks, wherein we segregated into private sector bank and public sector banks. The next one is basically what? The next one is the cooperative banks, right? And the third one, which we just talked about, was specialized banks, right? Now we're going to start on with central banks. Now central bank, yesterday only we were discussing that the main bank consort that we were discussing, right? And we gave the name of RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India. That is for our country, right? In our country, the central bank is which bank? The central bank is RBI, that is Reserve Bank of India. Now why it is referred to as central bank and which why certain banks are referred to as central banks, we are getting to know. So central banks are basically the bankers' bank. Now why bankers' bank? Why it is so? Because it is above, it is the superior of all the other banks which are there in a particular country. So when we're talking about India, all the other certain banks which we talked about, the commercial banks, the cooperative banks, the specialized banks, in सबसे ऊपर जो होता है, this is basically the head bank, you can see. Okay, that is the reason it is called a central bank and it is a bankers bank. That means जो बैंक का भी बैंक होगा उसको हम बोलेंगे bankers bank, right? Why it is a bankers bank? Because we talked about that we can get certain money from the bank, we can deposit our money in the bank. तो अब जो RBI होता है, जो other banks हैं, what they do is they go to RBI and they also ask for money. If they require any kind of money, they get it from RBI, that is they get it from the central bank. Okay, that is the reason it is known as the bankers bank. Now what are the basically functions what central bank actually does? It controls and it regulates the operations of all commercial banks in the country. That means control or regulate करता है जितने भी operations होंगे. That means yesterday we were discussing the central bank is the governance bank. Okay, governance as in all the rules and regulations, all the policies they will be discussing and everything. That means the central bank can come anytime to any of the bank and can ask for their documentation. It can ask for any of their, what you can say, the processes which they are going on, the operations which they are doing, all the things they can ask, right? Because it's the head bank, right? So it has all the authority to come up and question the other banks of the entire country. And it also controls and regulates. That means just in case it feels that, I should, just talk about this, or this should not be the thing which is going on, which a policy kar rahe hain, that is not right. So all these things are being finalized and are being monitored, by the Reserve Bank. That is the Central Bank of India. Okay. Again, banker to the government and controls the currency and the credit policy of the country. Now, when we talk about currency, now, certainly, must have, when I was there in 11th class, I had this question in my mind that if we are having shortage of money in our country, why don't we just, we can actually, go on and we can print money, right? We can print a lot of currency as much as we want. We can print the currency, but it is not so. Okay, central bank has the authority to go on with the currency, to print the currency, but it does not have the authority to print it like this one. Okay, there are various rules and regulations in the further chapter. You will be learning more about in economics as well. I think, yeah, in economics also. There's one chapter where you will be discussing about what kind of currencies are there and why it is not like we can print all the currencies like this only. So when it comes to controlling the currency, कि ज़्यादा पैसे आप नहीं दो अपने जो customers हैं, you don't pull out all the liquid cash to your customers. That is also again controlled by the central bank only, so that the private banks, the public banks, all the other banks, they are done and they are monitored properly, so that no manipulations are done, no other forgery is done. So any malpractices are being avoided by such monitoration, or you can say such supervision of the central bank of the country, right? And next one is credit policy of the country. Now, when we talk about credit policy, we discussed that time when I was discussing the public and the private sector banks. I gave you one of the example where we were talking about ICICI Bank and we were talking about SBI Bank, right? So when we talk about ICICI Bank is a private sector bank, right? But when we talk about SBI Bank, it is a public sector bank, and we know the difference between the public sector and the private sector banks. Okay, so when we talk about these two particular banks, what happens in there? If I want credit, now what is credit? Credit is basically loan. Okay, जब मुझे money चाहिए होगा, if I want loan, I want the credit from the banks, what will be there? There will be certain policies of each and every bank. Up, it is not same. It is never same in all the banks. ठीक है, it will be different in all the other banks. कुछ आपको percentage of interest कहीं पे ज़्यादा मिलेगा, कहीं पे आपको कम मिलेगा. Percent of interest means that if I take a loan, obviously I have to repay the loan also. और repay करने के, if I repay the loan also, I need to give some interest as well, obviously, right? So that interest percentage, it fluctuates with every bank, right? It is different for every bank. So when we talk about this fluctuation or this kind of difference in a particular banking system, why it is done? It is all supervised and done by the RBI. A certain bank will go to RBI and obviously it will give all its what we say, the policies and the rules and regulations, that this is how we are going to proceed on with credit. This is how we are going to proceed on with the loan thing. And then they will be the one who will be approving for the same. They will be the one who will be taking care that, okay, you can charge this much interest. This is within our limits. You can do this. But what if somebody, some bank goes in there, a new bank, okay, and it goes in there and he says that I'm going to charge a lot of percentage of credit, percentage of interest on the credit, on the loan. So now the RBI would be thinking about the general public as well. So they will be saying, no, it is not under our limits and we should not do this, right? So certainly they will not approve for the same. So each and every decision, if when it comes to certain policies or certain rules and regulations, it needs to be approved by the RBI, and hence RBI is the one who can go on anywhere in India. It can go to any of the bank and can ask for its policies and rules and regulations for them. Right. Last point, the Reserve Bank of India is the central bank of our country, which is established in 1935. So obviously every country has a central bank. Okay, so when we talk about India, the name of the central bank of India is Reserve Bank of India. that this is a 1 marker question as well. It could be asked in any of the MCQ also, or it could be asked in general 1 mark question also, that what is the name of the central bank of our country? And the answer will be Reserve Bank of India. And obviously you need to remember when it was established. It was established in year 1935, right? So here we are done with our basic kinds of banks. Let me just go on with that slide, this one. So here we complete the types of banks, wherein we talked about the commercial banks, we talked about cooperative banks, specialized banks, and the central banks. Okay, so yesterday we did the commercial and the cooperative banks, and today we have discussed about what specialized banks basically are and what are the central banks. Okay, let's proceed on. Now we're turning on to certain functions of commercial banks. Now, obviously, we did what commercial banks are, and we further segregated into 2 categories, that is private sector banks and public sector banks. And we discussed about various other, examples as well, which were SBI, HDFC, ICI, Axis, Bank of Baroda. All these examples we discussed. Now we're going to proceed on what exactly are the functions of a commercial bank. So when we talk about functions of a commercial bank, it is further segregated into 2 parts. The first is the primary function and the second one is the secondary function, right? So obviously everybody knows this. When we talk about primary functions, these are the prominent ones, right? The prioritized ones, okay? These are the basic functions, you could say. And the secondary is basically along with the basic one, it is also providing some additional benefits, you can say, and these are the secondary functions, right? So let's start. When we talk about the primary functions of a commercial bank are: the first one, that is accepting deposits. Now we discussed that what exactly the commercial banks do. They accept the deposits from various customers, right? Accepting deposits from the public in the form of fixed deposit, saving bank deposit, current deposit, and recurring deposit. These are basically the deposits which are done and which are accepted by each and every bank, whether it is a public sector bank or it is a private sector bank. Each and every commercial bank actually does accept the deposit from the customers, right? So when we talk about fixed deposit, now what is a fixed deposit? Fixed deposit is a fixed amount. Fixed deposit is a fixed amount which a customer is being taken, which a customer is being given to the bank, right? Suppose if I do an FD. FD is basically, if you talk to your parents, you'll get to know more about it, right? And this could be one thing, you could explore this thing also. Once we are done with the accepting deposit thing, after the class, you please go to your parents and ask, have you done any FD, or you have a saving bank deposit account or not, or something like this. Okay, so let's get back. So we were talking about fixed deposit. Now fixed deposit is basically what? You actually, deposit one amount. Let me quote it with an example. Suppose I have 3 lakh of rupees, right? So these 3 lakh of rupees I'm having, which are there in my account or in my hand also. You can say I have it at my home, the cash, and I'm thinking what to do about it. So what I do is I go to a particular bank and I actually deposit that particular money. ठीक है? तो अब मैंने वो 3 लाख रुपीस मैंने डिपॉजिट करा दिए, बट कैसे डिपॉजिट कराए? वो मैंने फिक्स डिपॉजिट में करा. फिक्स डिपॉजिट का मतलब क्या हुआ? 3 लाख रुपीस मैंने डिपॉजिट तो करा दिए, राइट? बट आई विल बी गेटिंग इन रिटर्न सम मनी फॉर इट. नाउ इन रिटर्न सम मनी का मतलब क्या हुआ? 3 लाख रुपीस तो मेरे हैं, राइट? दीज आर माय मनी, ओके. बट when I am depositing that particular money in the bank, okay, with the term fixed deposit, तो हर महीने, it is actually, there are various segregations. So it is a monthly thing also, it is quarterly also, and it is yearly also, right? So let's just take an example of yearly. ठीक है, तो 3 लाख रुपीस मैंने डिपॉजिट करा दिए फिक्स डिपॉजिट में बैंक, राइट? अब उस फिक्स डिपॉजिट जो 3 लाख रुपीस है, मुझे उस पर 7% इंटरेस्ट मिलेगा, राइट? 7% per annum, you can say, right? So 3 lakh rupees पे अगर मुझे 7% interest मिलेगा, so it will be 21,000, right? So just imagine, मैंने कुछ नहीं किया, I just kept that money in the bank, and I am getting, yearly अगर वो रखा रहेगा and I'm not using it, I am getting 21,000 extra. So when I will be taking out that money, I will be getting 3,21,000. 21,000 मुझे कैसे मिले? Without doing nothing but just depositing my money. Now it has a benefit. Why it has a benefit? Because वो money अगर मेरे पास रहता, so I think I won't be able to utilize it properly. Yeah, I would have just used it somewhere else, right? But what I felt is, rather than using it unnecessarily anywhere, if I don't want that money, keep it in fixed deposit, right? And also I'm getting money in return, right? So again, this is when they are accepting the deposit. This is one of the example that I was discussing. तुम लोगों को पता होना चाहिए what kind of deposit they are basically there. Okay, so when we talk about a particular bank, उसका जो main function होता है, primary function वो क्या होता है? हमारे पैसे रखना, right? That is basically accepting deposit. अगर मैं बिल्कुल lame language में बात करूँ, so it is basically keeping your money safe. Okay, next one is saving bank deposit. Now saving bank deposit, everybody knows, everybody must have seen their parents account, or it could be possible that you guys also must be having any accounts in any of the banks, and because you guys are minor, I think so, you'll be having a joint bank account with your parents. So what happens in there? Suppose I have money, and it happens with everyone nowadays. If we took a look at the charts, it is basically 93% of the people in our country are having bank accounts. Obviously, it's not always that you will be having bank accounts in public banks only or in private banks only. It is everywhere. Okay, so all the small banks also. If we talked about cooperative banks, which are there in rural areas, in the village areas. So even the village people are getting into going on with bank accounts. Why? I'll tell you. Just imagine, let's talk about Reliance. Okay, when we talk about Reliance company, the turnover is too much. They're earning too much of money. Every day they're earning too much of money. So are they going to keep it at their home? Definitely not. Nobody is going to keep so much of amount in their, at their home. So what happens in there? They cannot keep it at home. So why this is going on? They are not keeping it at home. So they are going to save it in the bank. Okay. So ideally, they are going to save it in their banks, and they are going to keep it in the bank accounts, right? So that they can follow up very easily, and they can go on with the further things properly. Okay, everyone, just give me a minute. Okay, so yeah, where was I? So I think this is clear. Accepting deposit, that means हमारे जो पैसे होते हैं, हमारे जो money होता है, it is they are able to keep it properly, and they are able to keep it safely with them, right? नेक्स्ट वन जो हमारा प्राइम फंक्शन आता है वो आता है लेंडिंग ऑफ फंड्स. अब हम लेंडिंग ऑफ फंड्स की बात करें तो एवरीबडी नोज लेंडिंग ऑफ फंड्स मतलब टेकिंग लोन. ठीक है, दैट मीन्स मैं तो लोन ले रही हूँ, बट द पर्सन हु इज गिविंग इज द लेंडर. Okay, so now the banks are lending money also. That means they give money also. They give it on loan. So it is the main business of commercial banks, and the interest charged on such advances is the main source of income. Now just highlight it and learn it very very properly, because this is the main thing. Main source of income commercial banks की कौन सी होती है? जो interest आता है, right? अब जैसे मैंने लोन लिया, right? I take a loan of 1 lakh rupees suppose. ठीक है, and I say that I'm going to pay it after 1 year. ठीक है, मैंने ऐसे बोल दिया, but हर month they are going to charge some amount of interest from me. ठीक है, क्योंकि obviously ऐसे तो नहीं फ्री में पैसे दे देंगे. They are also going to get something out of it. So what they are getting? They are getting the interest on loan, right? और ये होता है उनका main source of income. Main source of income का मतलब क्या हुआ? जितना भी उनके पास इंटरेस्ट से पैसे आते हैं, this is how they are actually generating salary for their employees. They are growing. So main source of income क्या होती है इन लोगों की? वो होती है इंटरेस्ट पे लोन पे जो इंटरेस्ट आता है. That is the main source of income, right? It may be in the form of cash credit, overdraft, discounting of bills, term loans, etc. Now ये जो हम terms पढ़ रहे हैं, overdraft, discounting of bill, so ये basically क्या हुआ? ये आप लोग पढ़ोगे accounts. right? There's a particular chapter wherein you will be discussing about discounting of bills, bill dishonored and everything. So we're not getting too much into it. अभी एकदम से नहीं तो समझ में नहीं आएगा. So when we talk about lending of funds, इससे हमेशा याद रखना, lending is basically giving money for loan, right? So जब banks का second prime function क्या होता है? Lending of funds. So पहला हो गया accepting deposits, हमारे पैसे रखना, and second lending of funds, that means हमें पैसे देना, right? अब बात करते हैं हम सेकेंडरी फंक्शंस की, कि एडिशनल फंक्शंस क्या होते हैं. ये तो हो गया फंड से रिलेटेड. व्हाट एल्स आर दे प्रोवाइडिंग? सो it includes agency services and general utility services. Agency services are offered to the customers and general utility service to the public. Okay, so basically agency services और utility service में divide होते हैं हमारे secondary functions. Okay, ऑब्वियसली जब हमने बात करी सेकेंडरी फंक्शंस की, एजेंसी सर्विसेज कौन सी होती है? जो हम सिर्फ अपने कस्टमर्स को प्रोवाइड करते हैं, राइट? दैट मीन्स जो हमारे कस्टमर्स है, दैट इज जिनका अकाउंट है. सपोज आई टॉक अबाउट आईसीआईसी बैंक. सो इफ आई हैव अ बैंक अकाउंट इन आईसीआईसीआई बैंक, आई एम अ कस्टमर. But if I don't have if I go to Axis Bank, I don't have account in there. So I'm not a customer. I will be using general utility service, जो कि वो सब पब्लिक को प्रोवाइड करते हैं, राइट? चलो बात करते हैं पहले. The first one is check facility. Now check facility, you must, I think most of you must have seen a checkbook with your parents, or checkbook नहीं भी देखी, so you must have seen a check. And if not, this is how it looks like. This is an example of HDFC Bank. Okay, so most of the checks look like this only. Okay, color change हो सकता है थोड़ा सा इधर उधर, but almost it is the same. This thing, the logo of the bank also is changed. Okay, so check facility पहला होता है secondary function में. इसका मतलब क्या है? Collection of checks is an important service provided by the banks to its customers. Okay, अब checks जो होते हैं ये दो तरह के होते हैं. एक होता है क्रॉस चेक, ओके, और सेकंड होता है बेरर चेक. ना चेक तो सेम ही रहता है, ये जो चेक है ये सेम ही रहेगा, चेक नहीं चेंज होगा. बट क्रॉस चेक का मतलब, यू सी दीज लाइंस, ये जो दो क्रॉस दिखाई दे रहे हैं, इन दो. Thank you so much everybody. We are going to meet up tomorrow.